just sort this out. I'm just sorting out how this is gonna look. I want this, yeah, a little bit closer, but I still want to show off all my stuff. Okay, you see this? See this little turtle? Hopefully it's loud enough. I still don't fully understand how to control like the volume and things like that, but hopefully this is decent. You can see there's some little friends. I got this little penguin here. Oh, I got some books. Maybe it's better if the books stay hidden right now. Oh, and these guys. You gotta see these guys. Slide them into view. Oh yeah, back. Remember that back is gonna be more impressive looking. These bears always make me feel a bit calmer. I think that looks pretty good. I'll move this giant bottle of water. I do drink a lot of water, but I'm gonna move that for now. So what do we got here? We got this hand. This hand has a lot of interesting memories, but I'm not gonna get into that right now. What can I cover? I was trying to get, yeah, I was trying to cover up this little ball a little bit. That's getting maybe a bit too finicky. And we got a little robot guy who lights up. We got a penguin and we got a turtle. The animals always made me feel a bit more comfortable. Anyways, wanted to try some more reading. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm doing pretty good. I had a good day and then something kind of annoying happened, but not going to let it get to me. I already did that a bit, so I'm not going to let it get to me anymore, is what I should say. For now, I'm going to try a bit more reading. Okay, now it's officially 8:30. You schedule these things for a certain time, but then you hit go live. I sound like such an idiot when I'm trying to, I'm like, I don't know if the volume works. I don't know if the time, I don't know how time works. I don't know how anything works. But I'll assume that it started a few minutes ago, one or the other. Anyways, if anyone has any comments, questions, complaints, please let me know. But otherwise, I was going to say, someone suggested that I try reading this author. I'm going to try to do a nice reveal here. So I have this book. You might recognize this author's name. I am going to do Bunnicula, but I'm not going to do it right away. I'm going to try to get warmed up, and then I'll get into the evil funny. But first, there's a little cat. I'm not going to put unless he like jumps up or something, I'm not going to put the cat on the stream. But he is here giving me some company, which I very much appreciate on a daily basis. So I bought this book a long time ago, but I never really got around to reading it. So I thought this would be a good way to force myself to read some of it. And I'm familiar with some of the stories and some of the themes that Lovecraft explores, and I've heard a lot of comments that other authors have made about him, and clearly extremely influential figure in dark and horror and atmospheric literature. So I'm picking something purely based on the title, and if I really love doing it, then maybe I'll do one more, but then we'll get into the Vampire Bunny afterwards, if that sounds good. Or if it doesn't sound good, you can listen to a little bit of Lovecraft and then take off, or whatever you feel like, or maybe don't listen to any at all. But for anyone who feels like listening to this, I hope you enjoy. So I'm going to find Beyond the Wall of Sleep, which is, I think, a really, really good title. And a good title should make you curious about the story. And I am already very curious. So let's try it out. Beyond the Wall of Sleep by H.P. Lovecraft. I have often wondered if the majority of mankind ever paused to reflect upon the occasionally titanic significance of dreams and the obscure world to which they belong. Whilst the greater number of our nocturnal visions are perhaps no more than faint and fantastic reflections of our waking experiences, Freud, to the contrary, with his puerile symbolism, there are still a certain remainder whose immundane and ethereal character permit of no ordinary interpretation, and whose vaguely exciting and disquieting effects suggest possible minute glimpses into a sphere of mental existence no less important than physical life, yet separated from that life by an all but impassable barrier. From my experience, I cannot doubt but that man, when lost to terrestrial consciousness, is indeed sojourning in another and uncorporeal life of far different nature from the life we know, and of which only the slightest and most indistinct memories linger after waking. From those blurred and fragmentary memories, we may infer much, yet prove little. We may guess that in dreams, life, matter, and vitality, as the earth knows such things, are not necessarily constant, and that time and space do not exist as our waking selves comprehend them. Sometimes I believe that this less material life is our truer life, and that our vain presence on the terraqueous globe is itself the secondary or merely virtual phenomenon. It was from a youthful reverie filled with speculations of this sort that I arose one afternoon in the winter of 1901, when to the state psychopathic institution in which I served as an intern was brought the man whose case has ever since haunted me so unceasingly. His name, as given on the records, was Joe Slater, or Slater, and his appearance was that of the typical denizen of the Catskill Mountain region, one of those strange, repellent scions of a primitive colonial peasant stock, whose isolation for nearly 3 centuries in the hilly fastness of a little-traveled countryside has caused them to sink to a kind of barbaric degeneracy, rather than advance with their more fortunately placed brethren of the thickly settled districts. Among these odd folk, who correspond exactly to the decadent element of white trash in the South, law and morals are non-existent, and their general mental status is probably below that of any other section of Native American people. Joe Slater, who came to the institution in the vigilant custody of 4 state policemen, and who was described as a highly dangerous character, certainly presented no evidence of his perilous disposition when I first beheld him. Though well above the middle stature, and of somewhat brawny frame, he was given an absurd appearance of harmless stupidity by the pale, sleepy blueness of his small, watery eyes, the scantiness of his neglected and never-shaven growth of yellow beard, and the listless drooping of his heavy nether lip. His age was unknown, since among his kind neither family records nor permanent family ties exist, but from the baldness of his head in front, and from the decayed condition of his teeth, the head surgeon wrote him down as a man of about 40. So we have white trash, bald with bad teeth. Pretty scary. From the medical and court documents, we learned all that could be gathered of his case. This man, a vagabond, hunter, and trapper, had always been strange in the eyes of his primitive associates. He had habitually slept at night beyond the ordinary time, and upon waking would often talk of unknown things in a manner so bizarre as to inspire fear even in the hearts of an unimaginative populace. Not that his form of language was at all unusual, for he never spoke save in the debased patois of his environment, but the tone and tenor of his utterances were of such mysterious wildness that none might listen without apprehension. He himself was generally as terrified and baffled as his auditors, and within an hour after awakening would forget all that he had said, or at least all that had caused him to say what he did, relapsing into a bovine, half amiable normality like that of the other hill dwellers. As Slater grew older, it appeared his matutinal aberrations had gradually increased in frequency and violence, till about a month before his arrival at the institution had occurred the shocking tragedy which caused his arrest by the authorities. One day, near noon, after a profound sleep begun in a whiskey debauch at around 5 of the previous afternoon, the man had roused himself most suddenly with ululations so horrible and unearthly that they brought several neighbors to his cabin, a filthy sty where he dwelt with a family as indescribable as himself. Rushing out into the snow, he had flung his arms aloft and commenced a series of leaps directly upward in the air, the while shouting his determination to reach some big, big cabin with brightness in the roof and walls and floor and the loud, queer music far away. As two men of moderate size sought to restrain him, he struggled with maniacal force and fury, screaming of his desire and need to find and kill a certain thing that shines and shakes and laughs. At length, after temporarily felling one of his detainers with a sudden blow, he had flung himself upon the other in a demoniac ecstasy of bloodthirstiness, shrieking fiendishly that he would jump high in the air and burn his way through anything that stopped him. Family and neighbors had now fled in a panic, and when the more courageous of them returned, Slater was gone, leaving behind an unrecognizable pulp like thing that had been a living man but an hour before. None of the mountaineers had dared to pursue him, and it is likely that they would have welcomed his death from the cold. But when several mornings later they heard his screams from a distant ravine, they realized that he had somehow managed to survive, and that his removal in one way or another would be necessary. Then had followed an armed searching party, whose purpose, whatever it may have been originally, became that of a sheriff's posse after one of the seldom popular state troopers had by accident observed, then questioned, and finally joined the seekers. On the third day, Slater was found unconscious in the hollow of a tree and taken to the nearest jail, where alienists from Albany examined him as soon as his senses returned. To them, he told a simple story. He had, he said, gone to sleep one afternoon about sundown after drinking much liquor. He had wakened to find himself standing bloody-handed in the snow before his cabin, the mangled corpse of his neighbor Peter Slater at his feet. Horrified, he had taken to the woods in a vague effort to escape from the scene of what must have been his crime. Beyond these things, he seemed to know nothing. Nor could the expert questioning of his interrogators bring out a single additional fact. That night, Slater slept quietly, and the next morning he awakened with no singular feature save a certain alteration of expression. Dr. Bernard, who had been watching the patient, thought he noticed in the pale blue eyes a certain gleam of peculiar quality, and in the flaccid lips an all but imperceptible tightening, as if of intelligent determination. But when questioned, Slater relapsed into the habitual vacancy of the mountaineer, and only reiterated what he had said on the preceding day. On the third morning occurred the first of the man's mental attacks. After some show of uneasiness and sleep, he burst forth into a frenzy so powerful that the combined efforts of 4 men were needed to bind him in a straitjacket. The alienists listened with keen attention to his words, since their curiosity had been aroused to a high pitch by the suggestive, yet mostly conflicting and incoherent stories of his family and neighbors. Slater raved for upwards of 15 minutes, babbling in his backwoods dialect of green edifices of light, oceans of space, strange music, and shadowy mountains and valleys. But most of all did he dwell upon some mysterious blazing entity that shook and laughed and mocked at him. This vast, vague personality seemed to have done him a terrible wrong, and to kill it in triumphant revenge was his paramount desire. In order to reach it, he said, he would soar through abysses of emptiness, burning every obstacle that stood in his way. Thus ran his discourse, until with the greatest suddenness he ceased. The fire of madness died from his eyes, and in dull wonder he looked at his questioners and asked why he was bound. Dr. Bernard unbuckled the leather harness and did not restore it till night, when he succeeded in persuading Slater to don it of his own volition for his own good. The man had now admitted that he sometimes talked queerly, though he knew not why. Within a week, 1 week, two more attacks appeared, but from them the doctors learned little. On the source of Slater's visions, they speculated at length, for since he could neither read nor write, and had apparently never heard a legend or fairy tale, his gorgeous imagery was quite inexplicable. That it could not come from any known myth or romance was made especially clear by the fact that the unfortunate lunatic expressed himself only in his own simple manner. He raved of things which he did not understand and could not interpret, things which he claimed to have experienced, but which he could not have learned through any normal or connected narration. The alienists soon agreed that abnormal dreams were the foundation of the trouble, dreams whose vividness could for a time completely dominate the waking mind of this basically inferior man. With due formality, Slater was tried for murder, acquitted on the ground of insanity, and committed to the institution wherein I held so humble a post. I have said that I am a constant I'm going to start that one again. I have said that I am a constant speculator concerning dream life, and from this you may judge of the eagerness with which I applied myself to the study of the new patient as soon as I had fully ascertained the facts of his case. He seemed to sense a certain friendliness in me, for no doubt of the interest I could not conceal, and the gentle manner in which I questioned him. Not that he ever recognized cosmic word pictures, but he knew me in his quiet hours, when he would sit by his barred window weaving baskets of straw and willow, and perhaps pining for the mountain freedom he could never again enjoy. His family never called to see him. Probably it found an Probably it had found another temporary head, after the manner of decadent mountain folk. By degrees I commenced to feel an overwhelming wonder at the mad and fantastic conceptions of Joe Slater. The man himself was pitiably inferior in mentality and language alike, but his glowing titanic visions, though described in a barbarous, disjointed jargon, were assuredly things which only a superior or even exceptional brain could conceive. How, I often ask myself, could the stolid imagination of a Catskill degenerate conjure up sights whose very possession argued a lurking spark of genius? How could any backwoods dullard have gained so much as an idea of those glittering realms of supernal radiance and space about which Slater ranted in his furious delirium? More and more I inclined to the belief that in the pitiful personality who cringed before me lay the disordered nucleus of something beyond my comprehension, something infinitely beyond the comprehension of my more experienced but less imaginative medical and scientific colleagues. And yet I could extract nothing definite from the man. The sum of all my investigation was that in a kind of semi-corporeal dream life, Slater wandered or floated through resplendent and prodigious valleys, meadows, gardens, cities, and palaces of light, in a region unbounded and unknown to man. That there he was no peasant or degenerate, but a creature of importance and vivid life, moving proudly and dominantly, and checked only by a certain deadly enemy, who seemed to be a being of visible yet ethereal structure, and who did not appear to be of human shape, since Slater never referred to it as a man or as ought to save a thing. This thing had done Slater some hideous but unnamed wrong, which the maniac, if maniac he were, yearned to avenge. From the manner in which Slater alluded to their dealings, I judged that he and the luminous thing had met on equal terms, that in his dream existence the man was himself a luminous thing of the same race as his enemy. This impression was sustained by his frequent references to flying through space and burning, all that impeded his progress. Yet these conceptions were formulated in rustic words wholly inadequate to convey them, a circumstance which drove me to the conclusion that if a dream world indeed existed, oral language was not its medium for the transmission of thought. Could it be that the dream soul inhabiting this inferior body was desperately struggling to speak things which the simple and halting tongue of dullness could not utter? Could it be that I was face to face with intellectual emanations which would explain the mystery if I could but learn to discover and read them? I did not tell the older physicians of these things, for middle ages, for middle age is skeptical, cynical, and disinclined to accept new ideas. Besides, the head of the institution had but lately warned me in his paternal way that I was overworking, that my mind needed a rest. It had long been my belief that human thought consists basically of atomic or molecular motion, convertible into ether waves or radiant energy like heat, light, and electricity. This belief had early led me to contemplate the possibility of telepathy or mental communication by means of suitable apparatus, and I had in my college days prepared a set of transmitting and receiving instruments somewhat similar to the cumbrous devices employed in telegraphy at that crude pre-radio period. These I had tested with a fellow student, but, achieving no result, would soon pack them away with other scientific odds and ends for possible future use. Now, in my intense desire to probe into the dream life of Joe Slater, I sought these instruments again and spent several days in repairing them for action. When they were complete once more, I missed no opportunity for their trial. At each outburst of Slater's violence, I would fit the transmitter to his forehead and the receiver to my own, constantly making delicate adjustments for various hypothetical wavelengths of intellectual energy. I had but little notion of how the thought impressions would, if successfully conveyed, arouse an intelligent response in my brain, but I felt certain that I could detect and interpret them. Accordingly, I continued my experiments, though informing no one of their nature. It was on the 21st of February, 1901, that the thing occurred. As I look back across the years, I realize how unreal it seems, and sometimes wonder if old Dr. Fenton was not right when he charged it to my excited imagination. I recall that he listened with great kindness and patience when I told him, but afterward gave me a nerve powder and arranged for the half-year's vacation on which I departed the next week. This guy gets half a year of vacation. That fateful night I was wildly agitated and perturbed, for despite the excellent care he had received, Joe Slater was unmistakably dying. Perhaps it was his mountain freedom that he missed, or perhaps the turmoil in his brain had grown too acute for his rather sluggish physique. But at all events, the flame of vitality flickered low in the decadent body. He was drowsy near the end, and as darkness fell, he dropped off into a troubled sleep. I did not strap the straitjacket as was customary when he slept, since I saw that he was too feeble to be dangerous, even if he woke in mental disorder once more before passing away. But I did place upon his head and mine the two ends of my cosmic radio, hoping against hope for a first and last message from the dream world in the brief time remaining. In the cell with us was one nurse, A mediocre fellow who did not understand the purpose of the apparatus or think to inquire into my course. As the hours wore on, I saw his head droop awkwardly in sleep, but I did not disturb him. I myself, lulled by the rhythmical breathing of the healthy and the dying man, must have nodded a little later. The sound of weird lyric melody was what aroused me. Chords, vibrations, and harmonic ecstasies echoed passionately on every hand, while on my ravished sight burst the stupendous spectacle of ultimate beauty. Walls, columns, and architraves. Assume it's to do with architecture. Architraves of living fire blazed effulgently around the spot where I seemed to float in air, extending upward to an infinitely high vaulted dome of indescribable splendor. Blending with this display of palatal magnificence, or rather supplanting it at times in kaleidoscopic rotation, were glimpses of wide plains and graceful valleys, high mountains and inviting grottos, covered with every lovely attribute of scenery which my delighted eyes could conceive of, yet formed wholly of some glowing ethereal plastic entity, which in consistency partook as much of spirit as of matter. Just give me 1 second. We're going to get back to this dream world right away. Get in there, bud. That's gonna drive me crazy. Okay, where were we? Ethereal plastic entity, which in consistency partook as much of the spirit as of matter. As I gazed, I perceived that my own brain held the key to these enchanting metamorphoses, for each vista which appeared to me was the one my changing mind most wished to behold. Amidst this Elysian realm I dwelt not as a stranger, for each sight and sound was familiar to me, just as it had been for uncounted eons of eternity before, and would be for like eternities to come. Then the resplendent aura of my brother of light drew near and held colloquial with me, soul to soul, with silent and perfect interchange of thought. The hour was one of approaching triumph, for was not my fellow being escaping at last from a degrading periodic bondage, escaping forever, and preparing to follow the accursed oppressor even unto the uttermost fields of ether, that upon it might be wrought a flaming cosmic vengeance which would shake the spheres? We floated thus for a little time, when I perceived a slight blurring and fading of the objects around us, as though some force were recalling me to earth, where I least wished to go. The form near me seemed to feel a change also, for it gradually brought its discourse toward a conclusion, and itself prepared to quit the scene, fading from my sight at a rate somewhat less rapid than that of the other objects. A few more thoughts were exchanged, and I knew that the luminous one and I were being recalled to bondage, though for my brother of light it would be the last time. The sorry planet's shell being well nigh spent, in less than an hour my fellow would be free to pursue the oppressor along the Milky Way and pass the hither stars to the very confines of infinity. A well-defined shock separates my final impression of the fading scene of light from my sudden and somewhat shamefaced awakening and straightening up in my chair, as I saw the dying figure on the couch move hesitantly. Joe Slater was indeed awakening, though probably for the last time. As I looked more closely, I saw that in the sallow cheeks shone spots of color which had never before been present. The lips, too, seemed unusual, being tightly compressed, as if by the force of a stronger character than had been Slater's. The whole face finally began to grow tense, and the head turned restlessly with closed eyes. I did not rouse the sleeping nurse, but readjusted the slightly disarranged headband of my telepathic radio, intent to catch any parting message the dreamer might have to deliver. All at once, the head turned sharply in my direction, and the eyes fell open, causing me to stare in blank amazement at what I beheld. The man who had been Joe Slater, the Catskill decadent, was gazing at me with a pair of luminous, expanding eyes whose blue seemed subtly to have deepened. Neither mania nor degeneracy was visible in that gaze, and I felt beyond a doubt that I was viewing a face behind which lay an active mind of high order. At this juncture, my brain became aware of a steady external influence operating upon it. I closed my eyes to concentrate my thoughts more profoundly and was rewarded by the positive knowledge that my long sought mental message had come at last. Each transmitted idea formed rapidly in my mind, and though no actual language was employed, my habitual association of conception and expression was so great that I seemed to be receiving the message in ordinary English. Joe Slater is dead, came the soul petrifying voice of an agency from beyond the wall of sleep. My opened eyes sought the couch of pain in curious horror, but the blue eyes were still calmly gazing, and the countenance was still intelligently animated. He is better dead, for he was unfit to bear the active intellect of cosmic entity. His gross body could not undergo the needed adjustments between ethereal life and planet life. He was too much an animal, too little a man. Yet it is through his deficiency that you have come to discover me, for the cosmic and planet souls rightly should never meet. He has been in my torment and diurnal prison for 42 of your terrestrial years. I am an entity like that which you yourself become in the freedom of dreamless sleep. I am your brother of light, and have floated with you in the effulgent valleys. It is not permitted me to tell your waking earth self of your real self, but we are all roamers of vast spaces and travelers in many ages. Next year I may be dwelling in Egypt, which you call ancient, or in the cruel empire of San Chan, which is to come 3,000 years hence. You and I have drifted to the worlds that reel about the red Arcturus, and dwelt in the bodies of the insect philosophers that crawl proudly over the fourth moon of Jupiter. How little does the earth know self! How little does the earth self know life and its extent! How little, indeed, ought it to know for its own tranquility! Of the oppressor I cannot speak. You on earth have unwittingly felt its distant presence. You, who without knowing idly gave the blinking beacon the name of Algol, the demon star. It is to meet and conquer the oppressor that I have vainly striven for eons, held back by bodily encumbrances. Tonight, I go as a nemesis bearing just and blazingly cataclysmic vengeance. Watch me in the sky, close by the demon star. I cannot speak longer, for the body of Joe Slater grows cold and rigid, and the coarse brains are ceasing to vibrate as I wish. You have been my only friend on this planet, the only soul to sense and seek for me within the repellent form which lies on this couch. We shall meet again, perhaps in the shining mists of Orion's sword, perhaps on a bleak plateau in prehistoric Asia, perhaps in unremembered dreams tonight, perhaps in some other form an eon hence, when the solar system shall have been swept away. At this point, the thought waves abruptly ceased. The pale eyes of the dreamer, or can I say dead man, commenced to glaze fishily. In a half stupor, I crossed over to the couch and felt of his wrist, but found it cold, stiff, and pulseless. The sallow cheeks paled again, and the thick lips fell open, disclosing the repulsively rotten fangs of the degenerate Joe Slater. I shivered, pulled a blanket over the hideous face, and awakened the nurse. Then I left the cell and went silently to my room. I had an instant and unaccountable craving for a sleep whose dreams I should not remember. Climax? What plain tale of science can boast of such rhetorical effect? I have merely set down certain things appealing to me as facts, allowing you to construe them as you will. As I have already admitted, my superior, old Dr. Fenton, denies the reality of everything I have related. He vows that I was broken down with nervous strain and badly in need of a long vacation on full pay, which he so generously gave me. He assures me on his professional honor that Joe Slater was but a low-grade paranoiac, whose fantastic notions must have come from the crude hereditary folk tales which circulated in even the most decadent of communities. All this, he tells me, yet I cannot forget what I saw in the sky on the night after Slater died. Lest you think me a biased witness, another pen must add this final testimony, which may perhaps supply the climax you expect. I will quote the following account of the star Nova Persei verbatim from the pages of that eminent astronomical authority, Professor Garrett P. Service. On February 22nd, 1901, a marvelous new star was discovered by Dr. Anderson of Edinburgh, not very far from Algol. No star had been visible at that point before. Within 24 hours, the stranger had become so bright that it outshone Capella. In a week or two, it had visibly faded, and in the course of a few months, it was hardly discernible with the naked eye. And that's the end of Dreams Beyond the Wall of Sleep. It doesn't actually have dreams in the title, but a very dream-centric story. I mean, I can see the extremely far-reaching influence of that one story. At the risk of sounding a bit nerdy, but I'm already spending my Friday evening reading H.P. Lovecraft out loud. Anyone who's played Bloodborne, if you know about the insight, the whole concept of insight is the more that you see the evil monsters and the more that you come to understand them, it drives you mad. I mean, clearly very much inspired by a story like that. Also, that story was a really good workout of my vocabulary, extremely satisfying to read. I feel like he's a really great author to read out loud, and I'll probably do more in the future because that was really fun. But anyone who saw the title of this video knows that we are not here primarily for H.P. Lovecraft. We are here to finish a very special story called Bunnicula. See that? So now that I've gotten warmed up, so we're just quick recap where we left things off in Bunnicula. They've discovered a variety of things in the fridge that are have turned white because this vampire bunny has a normal vampire would suck someone's blood and they would look pale afterwards. But this is a bunny vampire. So the bunny vampire has found all these vegetables and sucked out the essence and left them as pale white looking vegetables, which would be kind of unsettling. I mean, I would just assume that they had gone moldy if I saw all my vegetables as white instead of their, vibrant usual colors. But in this case, they've been taken upon by a vampire bunny. So you can see this cat is pretty nervous in the drawing because they've discovered a white zucchini that had its, I guess, probably the nutrients and just general essence, the life force of the zucchini was sucked dry. So Now we return to the story of Bunnicula. One sec. We're at Bunnicula, page 53, chapter 5. I'm not going to check if anyone's watching or not because I just want to read Bunnicula. All right, chapter 5. Chester goes into his act. The next morning, I was awakened by a scream. Robert, Robert, come down here right away. There's something wrong in the kitchen. For a moment, panic seized me. I thought she'd run out of dog food, but then I remembered the events of the previous evening. Mr. Monroe came bounding down the stairs. Chester, Chester, I cried. Did you see Mr. Monroe? His face has turned white. It's Bunnicula, isn't it? No, he said calmly. It's shaving cream, you idiot. By now, the excitement in the kitchen was at full throttle. The table was covered with Bunnicula's handiwork. There were white beans, white peas, white squash, white tomatoes, white lettuce, white zucchini. What can it mean, Robert? Mrs. Monroe was saying. I am getting worried. One tomato is a curiosity, but this is unheard of. Must be something wrong with our refrigerator. That's it. It's turning all the vegetables white. But look, she said, I left those tomatoes on the windowsill, and they're white too. And this squash I left in the bowl on the table. That moment, Pete and Toby came into the kitchen. Holy cow! What's going on? Hey, maybe it's a vegetable blight, Mom. Could that be, Robert? Did you ever hear of anything like that? Well, no, actually. That is, I've heard of blight, but nothing like this. Chester leaned my way. This will take forever if we leave it up to them. Sometimes human beings can be so slow. I started to answer him, but he was heading to the table. What about that friend of yours in the agriculture department? Oh, Tom Cragen? Could we call him and ask him if we're doing something wrong? It's DDT, Mom, Peter interjected. I know about this stuff. Because you buy vegetables that aren't organic. All vegetables are organic, Peter, Mrs. Monroe replied. That's not what my teacher says. See, Toby, told you this would happen. We're using chemicals on our food. And if you're not careful, you'll turn white too. Like me. Like Dad? Robert, couldn't you take that shaving cream off your face? Oh, yes, of course. Where's my towel? I know I brought it down with me. For that matter, where was Chester? I'd seen him going toward the table, but I'd lost track of him listening to all that talk about DDT. I just hoped they didn't use any of that stuff where they grew chocolate cupcakes. Pete, did you take my towel? Why would I take your towel, Dad? I don't shave. Just then, the door swung open. I could not believe my eyes. There was Chester with Mr. Monroe's towel draped across his back and tied under his neck like a cape. That was strange enough, but on his face was an expression that sent chills down my spine. His eyes were wide and staring. The corners of his mouth were pulled back in an evil grimace. His teeth were bared and gleaming in the morning light. He cackled menacingly and threw back his head as if he were laughing at all of us. I thought he'd completely lost his mind. There's my towel. What's the matter, Chester? Were you cold? Mr. Monroe bent down to take the towel from Chester. Before he could lay his hands on it, Chester flipped over onto his back, closed his eyes, and folded his paws over his chest. It was a hideous sight. He opened his eyes wide. With paws outstretched, he slowly lifted his head, his eyes glazed and vacant. Soon the upper half of his body followed, all in one smooth flow, until he was in a sitting position. Hey, Dad, did you leave your brandy glass out last night? Chester is acting a little weird. Well, son, cats are funny creatures. I glanced at Chester. He wasn't laughing. Psst, Chester, what are you up to? I'm a vampire, you dolt. Can't you tell? I'm trying to warn them. Well, it's not working. You better think of something else. Chester frowned, apparently deep in thought. So, you see, Toby, Mr. Monroe was explaining, all cats are as individual as all people. Maybe he just wants to get our attention. Isn't that right, kitty cat? Ordinarily, Chester would have left the room upon being called kitty cat, but he was lost in thought. Come on, Chester, give me back my towel. Mr. Monroe moved towards Chester. Chester's eyes lit up. He looked at me and smiled. I sensed I was not going to like what he had in mind. I was toying with the notion of slinking under the table when Chester fixed me with his eyes. How deep they were, like black pools. I felt myself floating, lost in them, my will, no longer my own. I felt an inexplicable urge to murmur, Yes, master, when he walked slowly, steadily towards me. As he drew nearer, I found myself unable to move. He stopped before me, never taking his gaze from me, and lunged. Meow! Mom, Chester bit Harold on the neck. Aw, that wasn't a real bite, was it, Chester? That was a love bite. Isn't that cute? Love bite my foot. That hurt. Chester, what's the matter with you? I sputtered. Do I look like a tomato? Oh, it doesn't matter anyway, Harold. They don't understand. How can human how can human beings read the same books I do and still be so thick? Our conversation was interrupted. You should see this picture. There he is lunging. Epic drawing that I'm sure everyone is very happy with. Our conversation was interrupted the way I just interrupted the reading by showing you a drawing. Mrs. Monroe picked Chester up and cuddled him. I was praying she would not add insult to injury by kissing his nose, which he hates more than anything. Poor Chester, do you need a little love? Do you know what I'm going to do, you big ball of fuzz, you? Oh, I could tell what was coming. I'm going to kiss you on your little nose. Yeah, I could tell that was coming, all right. Chester knew better than to resist. He went limp in Mrs. Monroe's arms. Mr. Monroe took his towel off Chester. Still don't know why he's wearing my towel, he said. I think he must be cold, dear. Here's your towel. Why don't you get his kitty sweater? Chester looked ill, and he can wear that all day. As Chester was being buttoned into his bright yellow sweater, little purple mice and cowboy hats all over it, Mr. Monroe said, What about those vegetables? Shall I speak to Tom Cragen? Yes, dear, Mrs. Monroe said. Why don't you? I'm sure there's some explanation. In the meantime, I'll change markets. To tell you the truth, I'm really much more worried about Chester. We'd better keep our eye on him. Chester and I did not speak until late afternoon. I was busy nursing my neck, and Chester was busy hiding under the sofa, too embarrassed to be seen. When we did speak at last, it was a brief exchange. Hey, Chester, I called when he finally crawled out from under. We don't have to worry about any vampire bunnies anymore. All you have to do is stand outside his cage in that sweater, and he'll laugh himself to death. Chester was not amused. That's right. Make fun. All of you. No one understands. Tried to warn them. They wouldn't heed. Now, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. Whereupon Chester and his 16 purple mice went into the kitchen for dinner. I was going to try to hold up my hands. Chapter 6. Harold helps out. That night, I had an uneasy sleep. Strange noises emanated from downstairs. It sounded like toenails clicking back and forth on the floor. Must be Bunnicula making his midnight run, I thought, although I'd never known him to make a sound. And I smelled the funniest odor in the air, something familiar, though I couldn't place it. As the night progressed, it grew stronger and stronger until finally it tickled my nose and I sneezed myself awake. I jumped off Toby's bed, still sniffling, and headed down the stairs to the living room to find Chester, to see if he could smell it too. The odor grew even stronger as I approached the living room. Standing in the doorway was Chester, a strange pendant hanging from his neck. "Oh, Chester," I said, "what are you wearing that awful thing for? It smells." "Of course it smells," he replied. "Here, I made one for you, too. Now put it on." "Are you kidding? That thing smells like garlic." "It is garlic," Chester stated matter of factly. "Why are you wearing garlic?" I asked, thinking that by this time Chester was capable of anything. As we walked into the living room, I tripped on another piece of garlic lying in the doorway. "Careful," said Chester. "Watch your step." I surveyed the room and saw that it was strewn with garlic on the doorways, over the windows, and around Bunnicula's cage. The poor little fellow had buried his nose as far as possible under his blanket. I was about to follow his example and return to Toby's bed to bury my nose under the blankets when Chester grabbed my tail with his teeth. "You're not leaving this room until you put this on," he grumbled at me. I think that's what he said. I wasn't sure because he had my tail in his mouth. "It's not polite to talk with your mouth full, Chester. Drop that tail." Meanwhile, my eyes were beginning to water. "Listen," Chester snapped at me, fortunately letting go of my tail first. "The book said to use garlic." "What book?" I asked. "The Joy of Cooking?" Chester continued. "The mark of the vampire says garlic renders vampires immobile." "What does that mean?" "It means they can't go anywhere if there's garlic around." "Well, I've got news for you, Chester. I can't go anywhere either. The smell is killing me. But you've got to put it on. It says so in the book. You don't put it on, I'll put it on for you." "Doe, Chester," I said as my nose suddenly and involuntarily closed. "I'd be leaving this room right now." And I did. I was so sick to my stomach from the aroma that I decided to spend the early morning hours outdoors. As dawn approached, it seemed that it would be a peaceful day. The sky was clear. The birds were singing, and I felt contented after my difficult night just to be lying in the grass, feeling the ladybugs crawl up my ears. Suddenly the calm was broken. Strange piercing screams came from the area of the kitchen. Not again, I thought. What's turned white now? As it happened, it was Chester. There in the sink, lathered with soap, was the feline detective, yelling his head off. Mrs. Munro was scrubbing him vigorously, and from the sound of her voice, was in the middle of a long lecture. "I don't know what's gotten into you, Chester. You never played with garlic before. I thought you hated the smell of it, and here you've gotten it all over yourself. Stop wriggling. You'll get soap in your eyes. You want to chew on something? I'll get you some catnip. But stay out of my herbs." Then she rinsed him off, rubbed him with a towel, and plunked him down in front of the stove to finish drying. "Shut the door," he hissed at me. "I'm freezing." "That silly woman. Doesn't she know cats don't get baths?" "What do you mean?" "I get baths all the time," I said, closing the door with my back foot. "That's because you're too dumb to bathe yourself. Cats always bathe themselves. It's a rule. Everyone knows that." "Well, at least it smells nice in here again," I sniffed as I settled down to Chester by the stove. "And it's all toasty warm here in the kitchen." "Sure, it smells nice again," he said. "But now the house isn't safe anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, getting closer. "I mean, it worked last night. The garlic worked. No more vegetables turned white. Now, did they?" "No, but that means Bunnicula didn't get out of his cage last night." "Maybe he was just tired," I said. "Or maybe he was full." "Don't be ridiculous," he replied. "It was the garlic. He couldn't leave his cage. But tonight he'll be free to roam again. And I've got to find a way to stop him that isn't smelly." Mr. and Mrs. Munro were hurrying in and out of the room, stepping over us, late for work. Mrs. Munro yelled up to Toby, Don't forget to take the steak out of the freezer when you get home today, Toby, and leave it on the table to defrost. And this time, remember to put a plate under it. Chester's ears perked up. Of course, he said. That's what I'll do. And he strolled past me with a knowing smile. Mrs. Munro turned off the stove and left the room. It was too much for me to figure out, so I went to sleep on the nice warm kitchen floor. I was awakened by a bite on the ear. Chester was sitting by me, looking very impatient. Boy, nothing wakes you up, he said. I've been yelling and poking at you for 10 minutes. I was dreaming, I answered defensively, about a place where there weren't any cats around to bother nice dogs and wake them up when they needed their rest. You can finish sleeping later, he said crisply. Right now, you have to help me. Do what? I asked. Get Bunnicula out of his cage. I sprang back. Get him out of the cage? I thought that was what you didn't want. I thought you said he was dangerous. What if he attacks me? Aren't you ashamed? Chester replied, afraid of a harmless little bunny. Harmless? I thought you said he was a threat to this house and everyone in it. Isn't that what you said? Isn't that what we've been talking about this whole time? He is a threat, but only at night. During the day, he's just a very sleepy rabbit. That's why we have to do it now, while the sun is still up. Follow me, he said. There isn't much time. Toby stayed down here forever. The others will be home soon. Boy, you must have been tired, Harold. You slept through lunch. I followed Chester into the living room. My heart was pounding as he unlocked the cage door with his paw. It looked as if he'd had years of experience opening locks. The door swung open. Bunnicula was sleeping peacefully. He did, however, look a little green around the gills, probably from all the garlic. I was just wondering how a rabbit could have gills when Chester said, Okay, Harold, do your stuff while I get what I need from the kitchen. Well, what do you want me to do? I can't read your mind. Get him out of the cage and onto the floor, and I'll be right back, Chester said. What? 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 I verbalized. How am I supposed to do that? Use your head, he answered, and he was gone. Looking at the cage, I realized that was precisely what I would have to do. Until this moment, I'd never had to face the possibility of actual physical contact with a real live rabbit. I looked upon my chore reluctantly. I seemed to recall my grandfather telling me that one picked a rabbit up by its neck with one's teeth. This I attempted, though the very idea set my stomach churning. I squeezed my head through the tiny door and gently placed my teeth around the skin of the bunny's neck. To avoid any suggestion of violence, I've never been one for the sport of hunting. I preferred to think of myself as the creature's mother, carrying it off to safety. Unfortunately, I couldn't carry it anywhere. For once my head was in the cage, it wouldn't come out again. I could go neither forward nor backward. At that moment, Chester appeared at the door, carrying in his mouth what looked every bit like a nice, big, juicy, raw steak. My eyes popped. My teeth dropped. Bunnicula, my mouth. I wanted it to go in sequence, but it doesn't. It goes, my eyes popped. My teeth dropped Bunnicula. My mouth opened, and I began to drool. After all, I had missed lunch. Chester, what are you doing with that steak? Haven't you gotten him out of there yet? I can't get either of us out of here. My head's stuck. Oh, Harold, sometimes I despair. Here, I'll get you both out. Should have done everything myself. He came over, dropped the steak just a few feet away from me, and climbed up on my shoulders. You pull your head out while I push against the cage. Who gets the steak? I asked. Don't worry about the steak, Harold. Just pull. I would have more motivation if I knew who is to get that steak. Chester ignored me. I pulled. He pushed. I felt something go pop. We all fell in a jumble. Chester, the cage, Bunnicula, and me. When I looked around, Bunnicula was lying next to me, still sound asleep. There you are, I said. We got him out. Now, let's eat. No dice, Chester said. Just read this to me so I'll be sure I'm doing it right. And he handed me a book. That book again. Start at the top of the page, Chester said as he picked up the steak. Why don't you read and I'll hold the steak? Chester, Chester, Chester replied. I took it to mean that I was to start reading. To destroy the vampire and end his reign of terror, it is necessary to pound a sharp stake. Chester interrupted. A sharp stake? He asked. What does that mean? I'll taste it. I'll tell you if it's sharp, I offered. Oh, never mind. This'll do. It's sirloin. Keep reading. To pound a sharp stake into the vampire's heart. This must be done during the daylight hours when the vampire has no powers. Okay, he said. This is it. I'm sorry I had to go this far, but if they'd listened, this wouldn't have been necessary. He dragged the stake across the floor and laid it across the inert bunny. Then, with his paws, he began to hit the stake. Are you sure this is what they mean, Chester? Am I anywhere near his heart? He asked. It's hard to tell, I said. All I can really see are his nose and his ears. He's really kind of cute. Chester was getting that glint in his eyes again. He was pounding away at the stake, harder and harder. Be careful, I said. You'll hurt him. Chester increased his attack. I was really getting worried when the door opened and Mr. and Mrs. Munro were suddenly with us in the room. Chester! Mrs. Munro screamed. What are you doing with my dinner? Robert, get that steak away from Chester. What's the matter with Bunnicula? Why is he on the floor? Mr. Munro took the beautiful steak away. I wished it a fond farewell with tears in my eyes. As the kitchen door swung open, Chester whispered with cold determination, All right, the last resort, and dashed into the kitchen. Seconds later, he was back, carrying his water dish between his teeth. He ran toward Bunnicula and with a mad yowl threw the dish of water at the rabbit. The rabbit. Unfortunately, he was so hysterical that his aim was not the best. With water dripping from my ears, I watched Mrs. Munro pick Chester up by the scruff of his neck and toss him unceremoniously out the front door. Robert, we are going to have to do something about that cat. Look at this mess. Dinner's ruined, the poor bunny is out of his cage, and Harold is sopping wet. I tried to look as pathetic as I knew how. Oh, poor Harold, Mrs. Munro cooed as she dried me off. You've had a rough day. You and Bunnicula. I don't know what's the matter with your friend, but unless he learns how to behave, he'll just have to spend the night outside. Mr. Munro, meanwhile, had restored Bunnicula to his cage and the cage to the windowsill. I couldn't believe it when I saw that Bunnicula was still asleep. Anne, Mr. Munro said, the steak is ruined. Why don't we let Harold have it? He deserves a treat anyway, don't you, old boy? I panted appropriately. After my delicious dinner, I turned my attention to the book still lying open on the floor. Another method of destroying the vampire is to immerse the body in water. The body will then shrivel and disappear as the vampire emits one last scream of terror. Maybe they didn't want to call it holy water, but I expected pets to be like blessing the water or something. Anyways, water. Phew, I thought. So that's what he was trying to do. Thank goodness he missed. I had no regrets about missing a scene like that. Poor Bunnicula. I looked over the cage, and there on the other side of the window was a pathetic tabby face looking in. His little nose was pressed against the window. I couldn't hear him, but from the movement of his lips, I could see he was very unhappy. Poor Chester. Outside is a harsh punishment. As for me, Mrs. Munro spent the evening petting me, and the family chatted with me all night long. And of course, I'd had my yummy steak dinner, so it wasn't such a bad day after all. Except that now my steak was all gone. Poor Harold. And that's what you eat the whole steak. You can't complain that you don't have any steak left. Chapter 7. A new friend in need. Take more calls. I'm really going for it with the raspy animal voice. In the days that followed, Chester's behavior was exemplary. Sorry, that's gross. He purred and he cooed and he cleaned his paws. And he rubbed up against everyone's legs to show what a good boy he was. I was getting worried. Chester acts that way only when he has something devious in the back of his mind, but I didn't know what that was. He had tried everything in the book to get rid of vampires, and all his efforts had failed. But I knew from the expression on his face that something was definitely up. Of course, I didn't know for certain, because he had not spoken to me since the steak incident. Guess he realized that my heart just wasn't in the destruction of the bunny vampire. In fact, I was beginning to like the little fellow. The Monroes were relieved by Chester's improved behavior. They didn't know how to account for his strange doings, but to their credit, they were willing to let bygones be bygones. The only disturbing factor in all our lives was the reappearance of the white vegetables each morning on the kitchen. And yet, after a few days, even that stopped, and life seemed to return to normal. One evening, I dropped by Bunnicula's cage to chat. I'd found myself doing that more and more since Chester had stopped talking to me. Of course, Bunnicula didn't talk back, but he was a good listener. I'd begun to think of him as a friend. A strange one, granted, but one can't always choose one's friends. I was distressed this particular evening to see that he was dragging his ears, as it were. He looked tired and listless. I felt his nose, and it seemed a little warmer than it should have been. I became alarmed. I ran over to Toby, who was doing a picture puzzle on the floor, and began to bark. Something I do only in cases of extreme emergency, since even I do not care for the sound. What's the matter, Harold? Toby asked without moving. Are there burglars? I ran to the cage and looked at Bunnicula. I looked back at Toby and whimpered. Toby just looked confused. Do you want to play with Bunnicula? Shall I take him out of his cage? Woof, I responded, indicating, I hoped, that was indeed what he should do. I'll ask Mom and Dad, Harold. You wait here. He was back in a minute, shaking his head. I'm sorry, Harold, but Mom says you can't play with the rabbit. It causes too much commotion. I looked down at the floor and whimpered again. Sorry, Harold. Maybe later, when we're all in here together. I regarded Bunnicula, whose eyes met mine. He gave a little shudder, and I felt like crying. My friend was sick. I didn't know what to do. I wished I could tell Chester, but I knew it was no use. He was just too mad at me. I would have to sort this one out all on my own. That night, I couldn't sleep worrying about Bunnicula. I decided to go downstairs and check on his condition. What I saw when I entered the living room horrified me. Bunnicula was out of his cage on the floor, while Chester stood in front of him, a piece of garlic around his neck and his arms outstretched, blocking the kitchen door. Suddenly, it all fell into place. Chester was starving Bunnicula. Of course, that's why he seemed so listless, and that's why the vegetables had stopped turning white. Chester had made it impossible for Bunnicula to eat. Oh yeah, you know this is all about the bunnies. This is a very literary worthy bunny. Chester, I cried. Chester jumped a very high jump. What are you doing down here? He spat at me as he landed. I know what you're doing, Chester, and the jig is up. That little bunny never hurt anybody. All he's doing is eating his own way. What do you care if he drains a few vegetables? He's a vampire, Chester snarled. Today, vegetables. Tomorrow, the world. I think perhaps you're overstating your case, I suggested cautiously. Go back to bed, Harold. This is larger than the two of us. May seem harsh, but I'm only being cruel to be kind. Who's he being kind to? I wondered. as I went back upstairs. The tomatoes and zucchinis of the world, maybe a few cabbages, just didn't make sense. But I could see I wasn't going to get anywhere with Chester tonight. Tomorrow, however, would be another story. I was determined that, by hook or by crook, my friend Bunnicula would eat by sundown the next day. Chapter 8. The end starts to come into view. Disaster in the dining room. I realized that there was nothing I could do for Bunnicula during the day, since he was sleeping. But that gave me time to plan my strategy. First, I thought I would bring food to his cage, but then it occurred to me that Chester must be taking everything away that was given to him. Pete and Toby usually left lettuce for Bunnicula during the day while he was sleeping, and Chester, ever watchful, probably nabbed it each evening just before the rabbit woke. No, there would have to be another way. I thought and thought all afternoon, and I could see that Chester had done a good job of isolating Bunnicula from his food. There was no way I could think of to overcome Chester's game plan. As evening drew closer and I grew more and more frantic, I stumbled into the dining room and saw the answer to my problem sitting before me on the table. It was a big bowl of salad. Oh, if only salad was the answer to all my problems. All I had to do was get Bunnicula to the salad and let him get his fill before the family came in to eat. With that funny white dressing on it, they would never notice if a few vegetables were to go white. I ran to the hallway to check the clock. 6:15. It would be 15 minutes before the sun went down and Bunnicula woke up. I would then need at least 5 minutes to get him from his cage to the table and feed him. All I had to do was make sure no one came into the room until he had finished, and he had a good 20 minutes, at least. I went back into the living room. Chester was asleep on his brown velvet chair, shedding in his sleep, still worn out from the previous night's activities. I checked upstairs. Toby was reading in his room, the last chapter of Treasure Island, I noted. Pete, who should have been doing his homework, was listening to records in his room. Oh, Pete's a rebel. I ran down to the kitchen. Hello, Harold, Mrs. Monroe said as I came through the door. What's new? Other than a rabbit starving in the next room and an imminent attack on your salad bowl, nothing, I thought. I stood at her feet and panted. She scratched my head. This gave me a moment to check out how far she was in her cooking. Sorry, Harold, she said. I have to baste this chicken. I noticed the oven timer still had 35 minutes to go. It'll be tight, I thought, but I can make it. Now, where is Mr. Monroe? I went to the front door and whimpered loudly. Mrs. Monroe followed me. Are you waiting for Daddy, Harold? He'll be home soon. Soon isn't good enough. How soon? I whimpered again. Patience, boy. He's late at a school meeting. He should be here any time. She went back into the kitchen and I checked the clock. 6:25. It was getting dark and Chester was still asleep. Time to swing into action. Having watched Chester undo the lock on Bunnicula's cage and having participated in that unfortunate steak episode some days earlier, I knew I would have no problem getting Bunnicula out. I just had to be a little more careful where I positioned my head so that I wouldn't find myself in the humiliating predicament of getting stuck a second time. Pets do have a way of ending up in humiliating predicaments sometimes when you're not looking. My timing was perfect. With Bunnicula swinging peacefully from my teeth, I made my way stealthily toward the dining room as the last rays of sunlight gave way to the dark of night. Once inside the dining room door, Bunnicula awakened in great bewilderment. It is not every day, after all, that one finds oneself, upon awakening, hanging from the jaws of a fellow creature, even so caring and gentle a creature as myself. Bunnicula opened his eyes wide and turned his face, as best he could, to me. I jumped up onto the nearest chair and placed the rabbit safely on the table's edge. Okay, I whispered. There's your dinner. Go to it. Get your fill as fast as you can, little bunny. I'll stand guard. I don't know that Bunnicula fully understood what was going on, but the sight of the vegetables piled high in the center of the table sent him scurrying in their direction. He was very hungry. As luck would have it, and as I should have anticipated, Chester's sense of timing was as astute as my own. No sooner had Bunnicula reached the edge of the salad bowl than the door swung open and Chester bounded into the room. He surveyed the scene frantically. I was unable to act fast enough. Upon seeing Bunnicula about to enjoy his first bit of nourishment in days, Chester leaped across the table, seemingly without touching floor, chairs, or anything in between himself and our furry friend, and landed directly on top of the bunny. "Oh, no, you don't!" he shrieked. Bunnicula, not sure what to do, jumped high in the air and landed with a great scattering of greens smack in the center of the salad bowl. Lettuce and tomatoes and carrots and cucumbers went flying all over the table and onto the floor. Chester flattened his ears, wiggled his rear end, and smiled in anticipation. To cat observers, this is known as the attack position. "Run, Bunnicula!" I shouted. Bunnicula turned in my direction, as if to ask where. "Anywhere!" I cried. "Just get out of his way!" Chester sprang. Bunnicula jumped. And in the flash of a second, they had changed positions. Chester now found himself flat on his back, owing to the slipperiness of the salad dressing in the bowl, and Bunnicula, too dazed to even think about food now, hovered quivering on the table. Chester was having a great deal of difficulty getting back on his feet, but I knew it was only a matter of seconds before he would attack again. And I also knew that Bunnicula was too petrified to do anything to save himself. So I did the only thing I could. I barked, very loudly and very rapidly. The whole family rushed through the doors. Mr. Monroe must have just gone home because his coat was still on. "Oh, no," cried Mrs. Monroe. "That's it, Chester. This is Chester's last stand." Wouldn't have gotten that as a kid. "This is Chester's last stand." You bet it is. Chester rolled his eyes heavenward and didn't even try to move. "Mom," said Toby, tugging at his mother's arm, "look at Bunnicula. How did he get out of his cage? He looks scared." "Of course he's scared," Mrs. Monroe said. "We probably forgot to latch his cage, and he got out. And I think Chester has been chasing him." Toby put his face close to the rabbit. "Mom, doesn't Bunnicula look kind of sick?" "We'd better take them all to the vet to see if any damage was done," she answered. I started to whimper. "No need for me to go to the vet." Mr. Monroe patted my head. "We may as well take Harold along," he said. "He's probably due for his shots." Mrs. Monroe carefully picked Chester out of the salad bowl and carried him by the scruff of the neck to the kitchen. I'm going to give Chester a quick bath," she said to Mr. Monroe. "Why don't you put together a fresh salad? Toby, you and Peter put Bunnicula back in his cage and then clean up the table." I didn't stick around for an assignment. This was not the time to be in the way. And besides, I now had a whole evening and night ruined worrying about the next morning's visit to the vet. This little effort of mine, I thought, had been a disaster in more ways than one. Oh yeah, I was just going to say, moms are always asking you to clean up the table. That's a classic mom assignment. That still happened to me. Chapter 9. All's well that ends well. Almost. Looking back on that night, I remember thinking that this whole mess would never be resolved happily. What would become of Bunnicula, my new friend, who was suffering from starvation? And what of Chester, my old friend, who seemed to have flipped his lid, and if you'll pardon the expression, was in the doghouse with the Monroes? Of far greater concern at that time, of course, was my own future. For on that night, all that consumed my thoughts was the fear of the next day's injections. It all seemed hopeless indeed. But looking back on the next day, I can tell you that happy endings are possible, even in situations as fraught with complications as this one was. Early the next morning, we all piled into the car, some of us with greater reluctance than others, and trundled off to the vet. And by afternoon, we were on our way to solving our problems. The vet worked everything out very nicely. He discovered that Bunnicula was suffering from extreme hunger, I could have told him that. Rather than jar his fragile stomach with solid foods, the doctor decided he should be put on a liquid diet until he got better. So Bunnicula was immediately given some carrot juice, which he drank eagerly. After he finished, he looked over at me with a great grin on his face and winked. Chester was diagnosed as being emotionally overwrought. It was suggested that he start sessions with a cat psychiatrist to work out what the doctor called a case of sibling rivalry with Bunnicula. I asked Chester later what a sibling was, but he wasn't speaking to me, so I looked it up. It's like a brother or a sister. And sibling rivalry means you are competing with your brother or sister for attention. I wasn't sure this was Chester's problem, but it sure explained a lot about Toby and Pete. As for me, well, I came out the best. Dr. Wasserman was all set to give me my shots when the nurse came in with my card. Wait, doctor, this dog doesn't need his shots yet. It's too soon. So I got a pat on the head and a doggy poop instead. These days, everything is back to normal in the Monroe household. Almost. But Nicola liked his liquid diet so much that the Monroes have kept him on it. And oddly enough, there have been no problems with vegetables mysteriously turning white since. Chester, of course, insists that this proves his theory. Obviously, Harold, the liquefied vegetables take the place of the vegetable juices, so Bunnicula has no need to go roaming anymore. Then he's not a vampire, I said. Nonsense. He's a vampire, all right. But he's a modern vampire. He gets his juices from a blender. Case closed, Sherlock, I queried. Case closed. Oh, Chester? Yes, Harold? What are those two funny marks on your neck? Chester jumped, and I laughed. Very funny, he said, as he began to bathe his tail. Very funny. The Monroes never knew anything of Chester's theory. They changed markets, and to this day believe they were the victims of a curious vegetable blight. Bunnicula and I have become good friends. Still doesn't say anything, but he snuggles up next to me by the fireplace and we take long, cozy snoozes together. One night, I sang him a lullaby in the obscure dialect of his homeland, and he slept very peacefully. It was that night that cemented our friendship. Now, about Chester. I said that everything was back to normal, almost. Naturally, Chester is the almost. He has been seeing his psychiatrist, Dr. Verrucht Katz, twice a week for some time now. He takes his therapy very seriously. The other morning, I was trying to get a little sleep when Chester came over and nudged me in the ribs. Harold, do you realize that we've never really communicated? I mean, really communicated? I opened one eye cautiously. And in order to communicate, Harold, you have to really be in touch with yourself. Are you in touch with yourself, Harold? Can you look yourself in the mirror and say, I know who I am. I am in touch with the me-ness that is me. And I can reach out to the you-ness that is you. Got a special visitor who's very in touch with himself. I close my eye. I'm used to it by now. He talks like that all the time. He no longer reads Edgar Allan Poe at night. Oh, how's this going to play out? Do you read Edgar Allan Poe at night, Jake? And once concluded that he had been right about Bunnicula. There has been no more talk about vampires. The mark of the vampire sits, its usefulness obsolete, on its shelf. Right now, he's reading Finding Yourself by Screaming a Lot. And the other night, when I heard the most awful noise coming from the basement, I didn't even bat an eyelid. I knew it was just Chester finding himself, as he calls it. He explains to me that he's getting in touch with his kittenhood, and I've told him that's fine, just to let me know when he's going to do it, so I can be elsewhere. I've had enough trouble from Chester's adventures. Oh, I'm just going to move him, because sometimes Jake likes to sit on the keyboard, and that could have disastrous repercussions. So, that's my story. And the story of a mysterious stranger who no longer seems quite so mysterious, and who is definitely no longer a stranger. I presented the facts as clearly as I could, and I leave it to you, dear reader, to draw your own conclusions. I must now bring this narrative to a close, since it is Friday night. It's Friday night right now! I couldn't have planned this better. Toby's night to stay up late and read, and I can hear the crinkling of cellophane. I can only hope it covers 2 chocolate cupcakes with cream filling. Ah, I hope Harold got those cupcakes. That's the end of the book. It's really a classic. And now there's a bit at the end. That's one of the authors. That's a picture of one of the authors. And he says, I'm often asked where I got the idea for Bunnicula. I wish I had a good answer, but the truth is I don't remember. When I was about 10, I started a club with my 2 best friends called the Vampire Legion. I also wrote the club's newsletter, the Gory Gazette. This guy sounds like he probably grew up to be a goth. In my 20s, I enjoyed watching vampire movies on television with my wife Debbie. It was during that time the character of a vampire rabbit named Count Bunnicula popped into my head. Debbie and I wrote Bunnicula for the fun of it. We had no idea we were creating a book that would have such lasting popularity, or that after Debbie's death in 1978 and Bunnicula's publication in 1979, I would be on my way to a new career as an author of children's books. After meeting as acting students at Boston University, Deborah and James Howe moved to New York City where they worked in the theater. Uh, I'm not going to read any more of their personal history, but that's nice that they got to do this book together. It's a great book, Bunnicula. One more time. I'm trying to decide if I should read more. But that's all the Bunnicula you're going to get. I don't think there's a sequel. Oh, there's one person watching. Does the one person watching think that I should read more? Maybe they'll say something. Maybe they won't. Let's see. What do I got? Could do another one of these. These are pretty good. You gotta see these. What do you got? Good question. This is short stories. They're short horror stories. Unless you're getting sick of horror, then I could grab. I was also thinking about where is this? Okay, we'll save this other choice for later. Yeah, I'll pick a story to close it out here. Oh, there's one called "Welcome to the Museum of Torture." How can that not be good? I agree. Wow. I like showing stuff to the camera. Welcome to the Museum of Torture. Welcome to the Museum of Torture. Lots of people died today. In a city to the north, a tour bus tumbled off a cliff, killing 27 and badly injuring 6 more. A family of 3, weighed down with debt, committed suicide by turning on the gas. And when the house exploded, 6 more died next door. An 86-year-old man was killed by a hit-and-run driver. A child drowned in an irrigation ditch. A fishing boat capsized. Some mountain climbers were swept away by an avalanche. There was a flood in China, a plane crash in Nepal, and in Niger, a religious cult committed mass suicide. But it wasn't just humans. I saw a dead hamster in the garbage can at a fast food place this morning. I was throwing out a coffee cup when I happened to notice it. The can was so full that the lid was half open. A perfectly ordinary sight, yet something caught my attention. A hamster lay between a crumpled hamburger wrapper and a crushed paper cup. Its fur was speckled brown, and its tiny arms and legs were a beautiful shade of pale pink. The poor thing almost still looked alive. I even imagined I saw its little paws twitching. Its black eyes seemed to be looking at me. I opened the lid the rest of the way, releasing the smell of ketchup and pickles and coffee, all mixed together. I was right. The hamster was moving. Hundreds of maggots were worming into its soft belly. Why was everyone dying? They had all been so alive just yesterday. A man was murdered in the apartment directly above mine, in number 508. He was apparently doing a residency at the university hospital. He was stabbed more than a dozen times in the neck. They say he was nearly decapitated. Did you know him? As the detective took the photograph out of his pocket, I pulled back instinctively. I would never be able to eat my dinner after looking at a picture of a bloody, severed head. And I had just been about to add the crushed tomatoes to my minestrone when the doorbell rang. Don't worry, the detective's tone was kindly, and the picture turned out to be an ordinary snapshot taken in an office somewhere. There was no blood, and the man's head was squarely on his shoulders. No, I've never seen him, I said, after examining the photo. Do you know anything about the woman who lives upstairs? The detective was well built, but he seemed very young and quite nervous. I wondered whether it was because he had been looking at a dead body just moments ago, smelling it, maybe even touching it. He appeared to be on edge, almost as if he had committed a murder himself. He kept his head down, and he seemed uncomfortable as he took his notes. No, I didn't see her much, just the occasional hello in the elevator. Did you notice men coming and going to her apartment? I'm not sure. I suppose I've seen her with a man, but I don't remember whether it was the one in the picture. I took another look at the photograph. The man was wearing a white lab coat with a fountain pen and a pair of scissors and a penlight in the breast pocket. He had a stethoscope around his neck. There were wrinkles at the corners of his mouth from the effort of smiling. Mm, the endless effort of smiling. Did you hear any suspicious noises at about 11 o'clock 2 nights ago? He spoke each word so distinctively that he was almost stammering. I certainly did. What kind of noises? For the first time since the beginning of the interview, he looked me straight in the eyes. I could see he was genuinely interested now. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I thought she was rearranging the furniture. And what time was that? I was brushing my teeth before bed, so it must have been a little past 11. And about how long did that last? Just a few seconds, so I didn't think anything of it. Did you hear anything that sounded like an argument? Any screams? No, nothing like that. The detective listened to me with the detective listened to me with his full attention, as though afraid of missing any little detail, and then he scribbled down everything in his notebook. Even though we had just met, I felt I was already indispensable to him. By the way, a patient at the university hospital was stabbed to death the other day as well. We're trying to figure out whether there's any connection between the two incidents. Would you know anything at all about that? He took a second photograph from his pocket. The woman in the picture appeared to be singing in a bar. She was 30-ish, slender, with a pointy chin and a pout. She had split ends, and the roots of her dye job were showing. As a hairdresser, I noticed these things. The attacker used scissors to gouge a hole in her chest. How awful! One in the throat, and the other one in the heart. I could hear the minestrone bubbling in the kitchen. My apron was splattered with juice from the tomatoes. No, I've never seen her either, I told him. No? He murmured, clearly disappointed. I felt as though I'd let him down. The tiniest detail could be helpful. If anything at all comes to mind, don't hesitate to call. I wanted so much to be useful, to say something that would keep him interested, but nothing came to mind. Well then, he said, bowing politely, if you think of anything, please get in touch. Of course, I said. My boyfriend arrived just on time. It had been a while since we'd spent our day off together. In fact, we'd been so busy, I hadn't seen him in almost 3 weeks. We were planning to watch a video and have a quiet dinner at home. Then we might go out to a bookstore or record shop, or take a walk in the park. Or maybe I would cut his hair on the balcony. though he always say it embarrasses him to be seen like that by other people in the neighborhood. Dinner was almost ready. I had seasoned the shrimp, and they just needed to be grilled. It was in the refrigerator, and the wine glasses sparkled. The minestrone had boiled a bit too long, but it would still taste fine. I had brought his favorite strawberry shortcake at the bakery on the plaza and set the table with the new cloth and napkins. Everything was perfect. "I've been dying to see you," he said as he took me in his arms. Or at least that's what I think he said. His voice was muffled by my hair, and I couldn't hear him clearly, but I decided not to ask him to repeat himself, in case it had been something less romantic. He took off his coat, inhaled deeply the smell of dinner coming from the kitchen, and pushed back his bangs, which were too long. We sat down on the sofa and held each other, neither of us saying much. We both knew that silence was the best way to appreciate a moment we'd been waiting 3 weeks for. I could tell someone was in the apartment upstairs and wondered if the police had come back. It was noisy outside as well, but not enough to disturb our peace. His arm was around my shoulder, and his other hand held mine where it rested in my lap. I laid my cheek against his chest, and I could hear his heart beating, feeling his breath on my neck. When I'm curled up in his arms like this, I can never tell how my body looks to him. I worry that I seem completely ridiculous, but I have the ability to squeeze into any little space he leaves for me. I fold my legs until they take up almost no room at all, and curl in my shoulders until they're practically dislocated, like a mummy in a tomb. And when I get like this, I don't care if I never get out. Or maybe that's exactly what I hope will happen. Still, the moment came when I had to pull myself away and break the silence. "Did you know there was a murder upstairs?" I said. For some reason, I couldn't resist telling him. A murder was special, interesting. "I saw a patrol car parked outside," he said, his hand still holding mine. "The police were swarming all over the building, and there were lots of reporters. It was awful. They even came here asking questions. I was a nervous wreck. The first time I'd ever talked to a detective in my entire life. Have you ever talked to one?" He shook his head. "He was nice enough," I continued. "Seemed new to the job, but he was very polite. I heard some strange noises the other night. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Probably had something to do with the murder. He was very interested about the noises. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but for some reason I remembered. And I had even checked the time without realizing it. It was 10 after 11, which is really the point. The exact time of death is always important in things like this." This time he nodded, and I continued. "They said the victim was a doctor at the university hospital, that he was stabbed to death by his mistress, almost decapitated, actually. It's too horrible to think about, but it's an old story. Blind love and jealousy, though I don't know why she went for the throat. I think I would aim for a spot with more meat, the chest or the belly. The neck is such a small target, you might miss completely, and I doubt it would be very satisfying, even if you did hit it. If you were that angry, wouldn't you want to tear his guts out or something?" There was one more queer thing. That same day, a patient was murdered at the hospital where the doctor worked. A woman who was just about to have heart surgery. The attacker used a pair of scissors, stabbed her in the chest. I wonder whether there's a connection between the two, something more complicated than a simple crime of passion. Oh, yeah, I nearly forgot. And a reporter from one of the talk shows came around asking questions too. How could they resist? It's the perfect story. But it was a shock, having a camera shoved in my face. I recognized the reporter, one of those fast talking women with too much makeup. No one in the neighborhood had seen anything, so she was having trouble digging up information. But I told her everything I knew about the woman upstairs, that she was beautiful, wore designer clothes. Oh, also she followed the recycling rules of the building. I only knew her from saying hello in the elevator, but the reporter seemed really grateful. She said my information was very useful. Of course, they'll hide my identity when they put it on TV. No one wants to have their face splashed around in connection with something as awful as this. She said the interview would be broadcast tomorrow. I'll have to record it. Who knows? Maybe what I told them will turn out to be the key to solving the case. Do you think so? I was out of breath from talking so much. At some point, he had let go of my hand. We fell quiet after that, but it was an uncomfortable silence. different from the peaceful moment we'd been sharing just a few minutes ago. The wine glasses shone on the table. Steam was rising from the pot on the stove, and the noises upstairs had stopped. "Do you find it amusing that someone died?" he asked. "Oh, I forgot to make the coffee," I said, pretending I hadn't heard him, and then ran to the kitchen. I clattered the cups against the door of the cupboard as I took them out, hoping the noise would break the silence and deflect his question. But it was no use. "Do you find it amusing that someone died?" He repeated in the exact same tone, now standing in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed. "What do you mean?" I said. "There's nothing amusing about it. It's just that I—" But before I could finish, he grabbed his coat and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I'm not sure how long I sat there, alone. The water boiled, but I realized I no longer needed it. I put the coffee cups back in the cupboard. Then I went out. I had no intention of running after him. It was as though he had already gone somewhere far away, and I could run and run, but I would never catch him. What had I done to deserve such treatment? I may have let myself get a little carried away, but I didn't think there was anything funny about those murders. I was truly sorry about what had happened. I'd been very serious when talking to the detective and the reporter. If I got excited, it was just because I was so happy to see him. In the end, I guess my explanations were no use. There was no one to hear them anyway. It was a weekday afternoon. The plaza in front of the city hall was almost empty. The ice cream cart and balloon vendor came only on Sunday. A man was taking a nap on a bench. Some young people were reading on the steps in front of the clock tower. The bakery where I bought the cakes this morning was quiet now. A flock of pigeons flew into the air and then settled around a bench. 4 o'clock sounded, the door in the tower opened, and the wooden figures, soldier, rooster, and skeleton, marched out for the little parade. A few tourists gathered around to take pictures. Since my boyfriend and I had usually met at the plaza, I had seen the show so often I was sick of it, especially since he was usually late. The angels appeared with golden wings fluttering. The left wing on one of them was loose and looked like it was about to fall off, while the jaw of the skeleton seemed to be stuck. Paint was chipping from the rooster's comb. I knew every last ugly detail. The angel at the back of the line turned on its spool. The skeleton rang the final bell, and the door closed. The tourists wandered off. I skirted the tower and took the road behind the city hall. Most of the souvenir shops were closed. I had a friend once who was dumped by her boyfriend because she didn't like a coat she had bought. It was a very nice cashmere coat, but for some reason it disgusted him to see her wearing it. At least that's what he told her. She cut it up, doused it in lighter fluid, and burned it. But her boyfriend never came back. Another girl I know lost her boyfriend for using eye drops in bed. They were just normal drops, but he said he couldn't stand seeing her put them in. Strange that a little thing like a coat or an eye drop can ruin everything. I walked for a long time, turning down narrow and deserted streets, hoping to avoid people, because every time I saw another person, I thought it might be my boyfriend. I passed the library, a dry cleaner, a beauty parlor that had gone out of business, a little playground with just a swing and a sandbox, a hedge of red robin, a puppy playing in the grass. At some point, I lost sight of the clock tower. When I finally got tired of walking, I stopped in front of an old stone house. A huge oak tree grew in the front yard. There were lace curtains in the windows and bright red flowers in the planters. An elaborate design had been carved into the paneling on the front door. There was no sign of anyone in the house, only the sound of oak leaves rustling in the breeze. The rusted sign on the gatepost was hard to read, but I managed to make out the characters for Museum of Torture. Just the spot for me right now. Bright colors streamed in through a stained glass window high above the lobby. There was a curved staircase at the back of the room, an umbrella stand with a mirror, two high-backed chairs, a piano that looked like it hadn't been played in years, a hat rack, and a few other carefully arranged pieces of furniture. The rug on the floor was soft and deep. An empty vase had been set on a side table, and a porcelain doll with curly hair sat on one of the chairs. A lace runner with a pattern of swans covered the shoe cupboard. Everything was very elegant, but the air was stale, as though the room were holding its breath, and the only thing that moved was the light from the windows when the oak leaves fluttered outside. I looked around for a reception desk, but there was nothing like that. No pamphlets or arrows showing where the tour started, no ticket machine or anything else you might expect to see in a museum. The doors on either side of the lobby were closed. I screwed up my courage and called out, "Excuse me." To be honest, I wasn't sure I wanted to see the Museum of Torture, but for some reason I couldn't stop myself. After all, torture might have been better than going home to my silent apartment. "Excuse me," I called again, but my voice seemed to die away. I thought for a moment, and then chose the door on the left. I always go left when I have to choose. He was left handed. "Welcome," said an old man in a bow tie. He held out his arm to show the way, as though he had been expecting me, but I was startled and froze for a moment. "Please come in," he said, running his hand through his white hair. His cologne smelled like a fern. The handkerchief peeking out of his breast pocket matched his tie. His cufflinks were set with pearls. I tried calling from the lobby, but no one answered. I apologized for barging in like this. "Not at all," he said. "But tell me, have you come to see the collection? Or are you here to contribute a piece?" "A piece?" I said. "An instrument of torture," the man answered, smiling just a bit. I shook my head. "I see," he said. "Very well, then. I would be happy to give you the tour." We were standing in the living room. The furniture included a pair of couches, a clawfoot cabinet, a long narrow table like something from a church, a rocking chair, and a record cabinet. There was a real wood-burning fireplace at the end of the room. It was a fancy room for a rich man, the kind of place I'd like to live in myself. There was one strange thing about it. Every bare space was covered with some device for torture. They were crammed in the cabinet and lined up on the table, stacked in the bay window, on the mantel, under the chairs, behind the curtains, even hanging on the walls. "Are all these yours?" I asked. "No," he answered, as though the idea seemed ridiculous. "I simply look after the collection. I give tours for our visitors, take care of the items on display, and appraise new acquisitions. We have to guard against fakes and forgeries." Is there a difference between the genuine article and a fake when it comes to things like this? Why, of course there is. We consider an item genuine only if it was actually used to torture someone. If it was simply intended as a decoration, it's a fake. Then he turned and pointed at the wall. "Well then, shall we begin here?" A set of 4 iron rings, each dangling from a chain, had been mounted a few feet off the floor. It looked like some prop for a magician or a circus act. The metal was rusted, and there were brown stains on the wallpaper behind it. The rings would have been placed around the victim's hands and feet, and then horses would pull the chains in different directions. It's a fairly conventional device, used in France at the beginning of the 18th century. In later years, the horses were replaced with winches, so the pain could be inflicted in more carefully calibrated increments, which is the whole point when it comes to torture. The man had pronounced the words "carefully calibrated" with special care. "Next, we have this leather strap and these pliers." The victim's wrist was attached to a table with the strap, and the pliers were used to extract the fingernails. Note the unusually delicate tips of the pliers. It might have been trick of the light, but the strap looked wet. The pliers seemed almost harmless. "This house was owned by twin sisters, daughters of a coal baron. They were maiden ladies who lived well into their 80s, and they traveled the world assembling this collection." "But what did they want with all this?" I asked. "Rich people usually collect paintings or jewels or things like that." "The desires of the human heart know no reason or rules. I suppose I might ask you instead what you hope to discover by coming to see us today." He coughed and put his hand to his throat as though about to straighten his bow tie. I caught another whiff of his cologne. You said that people bring things to you to add to the collection? That's right. From time to time, patrons come to us with items they've discovered. I examine them, and if they seem suitable, I purchase them and put them on display. But how can you tell if they're genuine or not? First, I test the age of the materials: iron, wood, brass, leather, fabric, tin. An object may look old, but only the proper scientific testing can reveal its true age. Then, I have to determine whether the instrument has actually been used or not. But that's generally far easier than testing the age. You simply have to check for the presence of blood. I looked back at the rings and the fingernail pliers and wondered whether the spots on the wall and the moisture on the leather strap had something to do with blood. If you're ready, we can continue, the old man said. No one joined us for the tour. I was alone with the old man for what must have been hours. Every room had been turned into an exhibit space: the kitchen, the library, the living room, the bathroom, the study, and yet it was almost as if they were still in use. There were spotless quilts on the beds, the smell of vanilla in the kitchen, and a book open on the desk in the study. But torture was everywhere. The old man was good at his job. He could rattle off the history of each object without missing a beat, and it was obvious that these things meant a lot to him. As I followed him from exhibit to exhibit, the only sound in the house was our footsteps. I caught glimpses of the garden when we passed a window. The sun was beginning to set. He was tall and his shoulders were broad. His voice was firm and he moved like a much younger man. I thought for a moment that I might have been wrong about his age, but when I looked closer, I could see the spots on his face and the wrinkles on his neck. What was I doing here? What was my boyfriend doing now? The shrimp had been in the marinade too long, and the strawberry shortcake would be getting stale. It was all too late. But somehow the sight of these instruments of torture, all of this pain, seemed to fit right in with thoughts of my boyfriend. This was brought to us by a bag maker, the old man pointed to another object. It's like a corset, I said, peering into a cabinet he had opened in the living room. It is indeed. It's cowhide stretched over a whalebone frame. The device is fitted over the torso and gradually tightened until the ribs crack and the internal organs are crushed. It was designed specifically for use on women. May I touch it? Yes, of course. It doesn't look particularly old, I said. You're quite right. It isn't. It's actually something that the bag maker designed himself. But my testing revealed traces of human flesh on the inside of the tube, so I found it worthy of being exhibited. I pulled my hand away and wiped my fingers on the skirt, trying to avoid letting him see what I'd done. Don't worry, he said. The quantities of tissue were infinitesimal. I was actually afraid I might be destroying precious evidence, I told him. I wondered which would be more painful, to have your throat slit, to have your heart gouged out, or to have your chest crushed. I bet it's the corset, since you probably could last a while, even after your organs burst. I wondered, too, about the woman who lived upstairs from my apartment. Had she been arrested yet? I imagined that nice detective using the corset to extract a confession. He could make her talk. He certainly was interested in what I had to say, unlike my boyfriend. There were bright tiles in the bathroom, a new bar of soap in the dish, and neatly folded towels. A shaving set and jars of makeup were lined up above the sink. This item is somewhat rare. It comes from southern Yemen. The old man seemed to be gaining strength as he went on. It's just a funnel, I said. Yes, but a special one. The victim is immobilized on his back, and the funnel is used to drip cold water on his face, one drop at a time. And that's torture? It most certainly is. One of the most brutal, in fact. He picked up the funnel and held it carefully in both hands. It was made of a dull silver metal, almost the same color as his hair. For a torture to be effective, the pain has to be spread out. It has to come at regular intervals, with no end in sight. The water falls, drop after drop after drop, like the second hand of a watch, carving up time. The shock of each individual drop is insignificant, but the sensation is impossible to ignore. At first, one might manage to think about other things, but after 5 hours, after 10 hours, it becomes unendurable. The repeated stimulation excites the nerves to a point where they literally explode, and every sensation in the body is absorbed into that one spot on the forehead. Indeed, you come to feel that you are nothing but a forehead into which a fine needle is being forced millimeter by millimeter. You can't sleep or even speak, hypnotized by a suffering that is greater than any mere pain. In general, the victim goes mad before a day has passed. He returned the funnel to its place in the exhibit. What did my boyfriend's forehead look like? It had usually been hidden under his long hair, but I had certainly seen it when he was getting out of the shower, and when he pushed back his bangs with that unconscious swipe of his hand, or when his head bobbed violently over me in bed. I was sure that beautiful forehead would look lovely under an endless drip of water, icy drops, cold enough to numb the skin, falling right onto his forehead, then running down his face and disappearing into his hair, like he's crying, with another tear ready at the mouth of the funnel. His eyes are closed, his lips tensed. His forehead is so cute, I have the urge to kiss it. But I can't touch him. I can't give him relief from the drops. Now, this one is absolutely unique, the old man said. We are especially proud of it. He held up what appeared to be just another ordinary pair of tweezers. There were stains where the fingers would have held them. The pain inflicted resembled that of the funnel we've just seen, but of a coarser variety. These were used to extract the hair from the victim's head, one strand at a time. I'm not sure I understand, I said. I suppose it does seem a bit strange, he said, nodding and touching his tie again. The hairs are extracted one at a time, a procedure requiring infinite patience and perseverance until the scalp is completely exposed. It's horrible to lose one's hair. When the Nazis brought prisoners to a concentration camp, the first thing they did was to shave their heads in order to strip them of their humanity. In reality, it does no physical harm, but we seem convinced that our very existence is somehow bound up in our hair. You're right, I said. I'm a beautician. I should know. Then you'll understand the nature of the torture. It is conducted in a room lined with mirrors. Thus, no matter how hard the victim tries to avert his eyes, he is forced to watch himself becoming bald. The process is time consuming, but it's important that the hairs be removed one at a time. If you remove several at once, the effect is lost. The suffering comes from the slow but steady sense of loss, along with the tiny pain the victim experiences each time a hair is plucked. It's nothing at first, but if it's repeated 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, it becomes the most exquisite agony available. The rich colors of the sunset were cast down on us through the skylight. The breeze had died and the leaves of the oak tree were still. The evening shadows collected under the man's eyes, making his smile seem a bit spooky. The next time my boyfriend comes over, I'll give him a haircut on the balcony. I'll cover him with a plastic cape and put a towel around his neck. And then I'll tie his arms and legs to the chair. Maybe this old man will lend me some straps. They've got plenty to spare. The ones with the fingernail tweezers would do. And then I'll pluck out his hair. Probably doesn't matter where you start, behind the ears, or maybe on the top of his head. They'll flutter down like insects with long wings. I'll enjoy that tiny bit of resistance each time I pluck a hair, the feeling of the skin ripping, of fat popping to the surface. Before long, his scalp will appear, soft and white and delicate, like the skin of the hamster I found in the trash can. The hair will pile up until the breeze sends it swirling around his legs. If a strand sticks to his face, he won't be able to brush it away. He won't be able to do anything but groan. He won't be able to stop me doing just what I choose. I hope you enjoyed your visit. I certainly did. Thank you for the tour, I said, bowing. Would you mind if I asked one last question? He nodded. Do you ever get the urge to try out some of the things you've got here? He put his hand to his temple and stood looking at the light in the lobby. Of course I do, he said at last. His smile had disappeared. In fact, I don't exhibit an object unless I have the desire to use it. He ran his hand through his hair. Would you mind if I came back sometime? I asked. By all means, he said, smiling once more. Whenever you feel the need, please come see us. We'll be expecting you. And that's the Museum of Torture. It's over. Creepy. That woman's gonna torture her boyfriend, but he doesn't listen to her, so maybe he deserves it. Okay, thanks. That was really fun. Reading was awesome, and I appreciate anyone who watched. Okay, have a good night. Bye.